I'd like to thank all of you for coming on the official National Park Service tour of Castle Williams. My name is Justin. I'm a volunteer for the Park Service. I will be your tour guide. In the back, well, depending on where you're standing, in the green shirt and the baseball cap, this is our other volunteer, Wilfredo. So we're going to go over some safety protocol first before we actually start the tour. So this is going to be a 100% guided tour, which means you have to stay behind me and in front of Wilfredo at all times. Please do not go off on your own. Some of these rooms have not been cleaned and have not been declared safe for visitors, so please follow to whatever room you go to, okay? Second, because there's so many of you, please listen to our instructions. Try not to deviate from what we tell you. And in the event of a medical emergency, you don't feel very well, and for whatever reason, you need to be let off the tour, let us know, and we can let you out, okay? Sound good? Okay, and for the final thing in terms of this tour, so we're gonna go through the second floor, which is where we're standing right now. We're gonna go to the third floor and then solitary confinement. And then the last part of the tour, we're supposed to go to the roof, but when I give my tours, I like to make people work for it. So it's a privilege you guys have to earn. So when I'm giving my tour, please pay attention. At the end of my tour, I'm gonna give you guys a little quiz. I'm gonna ask you 3 questions. If you answer all 3 questions correctly, I'll take you guys up to the roof. If you answer 1 question incorrectly, I'm gonna take all of you guys back down, and you guys don't get to go to the roof. All right? So, I'm sorry? If you guys want a new tour guide, come back tomorrow at 11:30. They'll have another tour then. But for now, for the next half hour, you are stuck with me, and so please pay attention to my tour if you want to go to the roof. All right? All right, here we go. So Castle Williams was constructed in 1807 and completed in 1811. It was created by a man named Jonathan Williams. Jonathan Williams was the grandnephew of Benjamin Franklin, a very famous military engineer, an architect, and also the commander of the Army Corps of Engineers. When Jonathan Williams first built this fortress, he had a lot of really cool design features that made this fort very strong and very unique. If you look at the wall behind you and to the sides, you see these giant archways. These archways actually run from the first floor to the second floor and to the third floor. In fact, the walls in front of you where the gate is, this front wall is actually one part of a giant archway. And what these arches do is allow the fort to have 3 levels worth of cannons and men. The room you're standing in right now, this is called a casemate. This is a bomb-proof shelter where you have men and guns working all day long. And another pretty cool design feature, if you see these arches, they would have been open, so the brick walls would not be there. So, in case of an emergency, 1 gun crew can run around the whole fort shooting a bunch of cannons at the same time. When this fort was constructed, this is the first uniquely American designed fort anywhere in the US. However, when the fort was completed in 1811, people actually made fun of this thing. They thought it looked like a wheel of Swiss cheese. And so they thought it was a horrible idea, and they called it the cheese box of New York Harbor. Jonathan Williams was charged to build defenses in New York Harbor in preparation for the War of 1812. So when the British came attacking during the War of 1812, forts like these were designed to prevent the British from capturing New York City like they did in the American Revolution. But when Jonathan Williams presented this fort to the government had a lot of questions. Was it strong enough? Was it going to stand up to British attack? And Jonathan Williams had the ultimate test. He said, okay, to test out the fort's strength, I want the Navy to sail warships out in the harbor and start shooting at the fort to see if the walls would hold. As my personal guarantee of the fort's success, I will stand inside the rooms as you are shooting those cannons. So if the walls failed, I would most surely pass away. So the Navy did do that. They sailed a few warships out in front and they started shooting at the fort. And Jonathan Williams stood inside praying that his walls would hold. Most of the shots missed. A few of them glanced off the sides because the fort is in the shape of a circle. It's very hard to have a direct hit against the fort itself because of its circular shape. However, one shot made a direct hit against the wall and made a 3-inch dent. However, Jonathan Williams and the government were actually very pleased that it made a 3-inch dent. Why? Because the walls here are over 8 feet thick. So, pretty decent sized wall. You guys notice by all your cell phones, you guys get no Wi-Fi service in here. So, pretty weird design feature, but 8 feet thick, that was really awesome. And Jonathan Williams and the government were both very pleased with the result. The fort was so effective that during the War of 1812, the British never actually attacked and controlled New York City. They took one look at all the forts in the harbor and they thought it was impossible to ever attack the city, and they actually sailed further down the coast and burned down Washington, D.C. instead. And so the War of 1812 came and went. New Yorkers just went to their taverns, ordered their beer, and read in the newspaper how the White House was burning. But after that, this place turned into a barracks. But the fort later became obsolete, and they instead had soldiers sleeping here and train right outside. However, the fort's use began to change during the American Civil War in 1861. So we're going to go up to the third fort and talk about some of the fort's later history and then solitary confinement. After the War of 1812 and the fort becomes obsolete, the Army uses this fort as a barracks for which soldiers can sleep and train. However, the fort began to change in terms of use during the American Civil War. When war breaks out, we have a huge problem. What do we do with war prisoners, the people we capture on the battlefield? Where do we put them? The Army decided to use a lot of these old, obsolete forts and turn them into prisons. And by turn, I mean just put a wooden wall in front of the gate, and that was it. They put around 60 to 70 Confederate prisoners in one room at a time. So I don't know how many of you there are right now, but you pretty much had so many people in this room that there was not enough room to lay down and go to sleep. So half of you would have to stand in the corner and wait for the other half of the people to lie down and take a nap for a few hours, and then you guys would switch. These Confederate prisoners, all 60 to 70, if you guys had to use the bathroom, you had one bucket in the corner that you all had to share when you went to the bathroom. It was never empty, so you had disease rampant inside these rooms. When did you get food? Sometimes, maybe never. If the guard remembered to bring you food, you were pretty lucky that day. So no food, pretty bad sanitary practices. You can imagine, the really bad conditions inside this fort during its time as a prison. However, during the Civil War, a lot of prisons, north and south, were like these. They didn't really think about, what to do with war prisoners. They were too worried about winning the war and defeating the enemy. So Civil War prisons didn't have too many comforts, and unfortunately, many died if you were captured. These were more for the enlisted men, some of the rank and file soldiers of the Confederate Army. The officers actually lived very nicely over in Fort J. They often got their own one-bedroom apartment, to stay for the duration of the war, rent-free. Really nice view of the harbor as well. They essentially had to sign an agreement saying, "I will never escape the island," and they decided to just roam around the island to their leisure. The two things they really liked to do to pass the time is play baseball and play leapfrog. That was their favorite thing to do. One way that Confederate officers tried to raise the spirits of their men was to actually come inside the fort and visit the soldiers inside this prison and said, "Don't worry, the war's almost over and we can all go home." However, the fort's conditions were so bad that around 20% of the soldiers living in these rooms died during their term of captivity. So they basically had funerals almost every other week for these Confederate soldiers. Fortunately, however, the Civil War ends and the remaining prisoners are sent home. The Army decides to continue using Castle Williams as a prison, and they start making some updates. If you guys look at the iron gates, all the concrete you're standing on, the glass, the radiator, the windows, and the lights, those were added after the Civil War, from the 20s all the way to the 50s. It was continuously updated. You had around 15 people in this room during that time, so a lot better conditions. Instead of sleeping on the floor, you actually had bunk beds, a huge improvement as well. Behind you, you had on either corner, you had plumbing for a toilet and a sink, so you didn't have a bucket anymore. And conditions were actually pretty good in here. However, what was this prison made for from the 20s all the way to the 50s and 60s? The prison was made for soldiers in our military who either got drunk, didn't show up for work, disobeyed orders, or just committed relatively minor crimes. These were good people. They just messed up once and they had to be sent here to sober up or to serve out a few weeks or a few months worth of time. If any of you are familiar with Alcatraz or Fort Leavenworth, this prison, along with those other two, became what was known as the Army Disciplinary Barracks. It's where the military punishes their own soldiers. However, this particular prison became the model prison because conditions were actually pretty nice. And so soldiers, if they ever screwed up in their term of duty, they actually would line up in Manhattan to turn themselves in because they wanted to be sent here. So, if you guys ever see, classic movies about Alcatraz or other prisons, you had prisoners wearing striped uniforms or carrying like an iron ball and chain. They had to break rocks for whatever reason and also work with concrete, do really hard, back-breaking work in the hard heat of the summer. That was their work for prisons. You were put to work. However, here in Castle Williams, the worst thing you had to do was either sweep the floor, serve officers at the officers club in case there was a party, or in case an officer had his family living here and he needed a babysitter. Who better to ask than a prisoner here in Castle Williams? So you actually had some soldiers here volunteer to babysit kids while their officers went to work. Obviously, with every prison comes some pretty hilarious escape stories. There was one prisoner in particular. This story I remember pretty well because it was actually pretty funny. He volunteered to serve as a waiter for an officers' party. So the catering staff gave him a tuxedo. He went over to the officers' club and he served the officers champagne while they danced. When the party was over, dressed in his tuxedo, he realized he looked just like everybody else. So he actually got on the ferry and left with the whole crowd, and thus completing a successful escape attempt. The army panicked. They were running all over the island looking for him. They found him a week later getting drunk at a bar, and he already sold his tuxedo. So not very successful in the long run, but he enjoyed freedom for about a week. But anyway, the fort was actually pretty nice. People didn't really have too many bad things to say about it. However, all this came to an end in 1966. That was when the Army decided to officially leave Castle Williams. Remember, the Army was here since 1790, so this was one of the longest running Army posts in the US history. In 66, the Army decides that it's way too much money to use operating this entire island, and so they leave. And that's when the Coast Guard actually comes in and turns this into the largest Coast Guard base in the entire world. But the Coast Guard doesn't need a prison, it doesn't need a fort, it doesn't need a barracks. What does it need? It needs a place for them to put their kids. So Castle Williams becomes a community center towards the end of its life. And we're going to talk about that in solitary confinement. Okay, so after the Army leaves in 1966, the Coast Guard comes in and turns this place into a community center. Think of it as a giant YMCA for their kids. The Coast Guard put their kids in here so they can have their Boy Scout meetings, Girl Scout meetings. They had a dance club for the teenagers. They had a daycare center. One person came back from his days living in Governor's Island. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's fine. You're just talking so much.
Yeah, no, I'm waiting for everyone to come out, actually. Yeah. All right, so little kids from the Coast Guard, they had their Boy Scout meetings, Girl Scout meetings. You had a dance club for the teenagers. You had a daycare center, home ec classes, anything you can think of that was necessary to raise a family. It was in this castle itself. And it was, the daycare center was here when all these iron bars, all this glass was still here. So not the brightest looking daycare center you've ever seen in your life, but it was pretty nice by most accounts. The kids would grow up, they'd come back, they have fond memories of this place. One guy actually came back and said his mother caught him making out with his girlfriend in one of these rooms. But he had a pretty nice memory from that. Anyway, the kids tried to make their best of it. They tried to hang posters or curtains over the walls because they do look pretty depressing. They tried to, pretend that this wasn't a jail, it was just some mysterious place. And then the Coast Guard also realized that this place still had lead paint and asbestos all over the walls, so this was not the best place to put your kids. So what they did was they moved all the kids out and they built new facilities, and this place ended its life as a storage center for some of the Coast Guard ships that come in every now and then. And then in about 1996, the Coast Guard leaves Governor's Island for good. And the island actually stays dormant from 1996 to about 2006, when we opened the island to allow visitors to come on. So during that time, nobody ever came to the island and things started falling apart. Which is why the National Park Service gave us a lot of money to start fixing up the fort and other facilities and start allowing visitors to come onto Governor's Island and into the castle itself. However, before the Coast Guard left Governor's Island in 1996, they used Castle Williams once every year on Halloween, October 31st, and they turned this into the best haunted house on the East Coast. The Coast Guard officers, they would always have contests to see who can scare their kids the most. You had people, dressing up as skeletons. They had tombstones and smoke in the courtyard. They went to the tool shed, brought out that, rusty chainsaw and had a Jason mask, and they were running around trying to scare their kids. You had mixed reactions. Some people came back as grown-ups and said this was the best experience of their lives. This one lady, she saw the front front gate of Castle Williams and refused to step inside because she was so mentally scarred by the experience. She couldn't come back ever again. But the kids had a lot of fun, and you could see some of the evidence of their decorations. On the ground in front of the entrance, you see some of the red paint splattered on the floor. That was the best they had to kind of show that, oh, there was blood on the floor or blood on the walls or whatever. But then again, people had their fun, and it really shows how Castle Williams and Governor's Island changed from a defense to a prison and finally to a town or a community center. And so that's going to end the boring history part of the tour. So now I'm going to ask you guys those important 3 questions to decide whether you guys go to the roof. So first question. On October 31st, what was the castle used as?
Haunted house.
All right, first one down. That's good. All right, second question. All right, this is going to be a tough one. During the Civil War, we locked Confederate prisoners of war in these rooms. How many people did we lock in these rooms?
60 to 70.
All right, good. Okay, so I'm going to choose one person for the last question. All right, let's see. I choose...
Somebody who's not
I choose you.
right?
Oh, great.
Okay.
We're never.
I choose you. All right. Only you can answer this question. Nobody else can help you. The hopes and dreams of all these people lay in your hands.
Oh my God. Why him?
All right.
Is it on purpose?
Okay, here's the question. Castle Williams was constructed in 1807 and completed in 1811. Who was the man that constructed Castle Williams?
John Williams, right?
Wait, say it again?
John Williams. Right?
Is that your final answer?
Yeah, Jonathan.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
All right, that's correct. Big round of applause.
I should have answered before you said the question.
All right, so let me move to the front. Okay, so as your reward, you guys get to go to the roof. So, wait. All right, one more thing before we go. So we're gonna go up the original 200-year-old spiral staircase. It's very old, very dusty, and very dark. Please watch your step. Please hold on to the handrails. And if you're above 5'7", please duck. People were shorter back then.
I was trying to mouth it too. And even steps below. Be careful.
How far does it spiral?
Do you know where we went for the first time last summer? Bunker Hill.
Oh,
We went inside the monument.
yeah. I used to take students there.
Oh yeah?
is, and would you like to see up to see what's over this
All
wall?
that dirt and made the island downstairs.
Yeah. If you want to play video games, you can ask mommy and daddy to hold it. You can have to do that. Daddy to pick you up now? Would you like daddy to pick you up so you can look a little more? Yeah? Not going upstairs. I said no. Is that okay?
This is a Civil War era 15-inch Rodman cannon. It weighs about 10,000 pounds and fires a 400-pound cannonball at a range of over 2.5 miles. And if we were to fire the cannon right now, we would totally tear up Washington Square Park, which is why we can't fire the cannon as of right now. But again, it's because of advancing technology that the castle became obsolete, as well as the other forts in the New York Harbor. And actually, if you look out at the Statue of Liberty, you could see another fort that was here that worked together with Castle Williams. At the Statue of Liberty, right at the base of the statue, that weird flat structure right before the pedestal, that is the old Fort Wood. Fort Wood was a star-shaped fortification. When Fort Wood became obsolete, the Army decided to make it a pedestal for the Statue of Liberty after it was delivered. If you guys are familiar with Ellis Island, the immigration center was not there originally. Originally, Ellis Island was the location of Fort Gibson. After Fort Gibson became obsolete, it was torn down to make way for the Ellis Immigration Center. And if you look right into Lower Manhattan, covered by the white tent and the white boat, if you could see that red brick fort, that is Castle Clinton, where you get tickets to the Statue of Liberty. Castle Clinton is a similar design to Castle Williams, but it's only one level. We're not sure why. I'm pretty sure we just ran out of money and materials, or the Army just got lazy. Anyway, all these forts would have worked together, and if you can imagine a British warship sailing into the harbor, if for whatever reason the wind dies down, you are dead in the water with 4 or 5 different forts firing at you. So the British pretty much sharked their pants when they saw all these forts in the harbor, which is why they thought Washington, D.C. was a better target. But then again, the fort now is a national park, as with all the other forts in the area. So I highly encourage you guys to try to visit them all, learn a little bit about New York and military and U.S. national history. And so that's going to be the end of our tour. I'd like to thank all of you guys for coming on the tour again. If you have any other questions, please ask me or Wilfredo. I guess we'll be here for like another minute or so if you guys need to take more pictures. If not, we're going to head down the same way we came. All right?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Because you know how dangerous it is that you keep fire. Look at where you're going, don't look at other people. Yeah, look down, it's a twisted staircase. This is called a spiral staircase.
Oh, yeah, it's so funny.
A little dark now. Keep going. Doing great. Good job, we're almost there. Okay, we're almost there. We're going to see the steps again. Keep going. Okay. Stay where you are.